Recording in progress. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. This is Andrés Moreno, joined with my co-host, Jesse Del Fierro.
Hello, hello.
And welcome to the Engagement Lab podcast. This is a podcast that draws from the series of conversations and interviews from individuals who are paving the way for equitable, sustainable, inclusive, diverse ecology for the arts. Our focus is to learn and unlearn, share and listen, and actively create the stepping stones towards the future of our dreams. This is the movement we are building, and we're so excited to have you join us today. This is our first episode. I'm really scared / excited. How are you feeling, Jesse?
I am all of the above in the best way possible.
The Engagement Lab actually came of a dream that Jesse had and shared with me as we were working together here for Theatre Alberta. Theatre Alberta is a resource that is dedicated to the growth and development of the Alberta theatre community. They are committed to achieving this by providing responsive and quality programs, services, and advocacy that serve and unite the professional, amateur, and educational theatre constituencies here in Alberta. But Theatre Alberta really creates workshops and opportunities for folks to unite and get together and work together and share wisdom. And that's exactly what Jesse and I have been focusing on with the Engagement Lab. Before we get started and we talk about the Engagement Lab, I think it's important for everyone out there to kind of get a little bit of a snapshot of who we are, and especially what led us to being able to have the privilege and the huge honor of being able to curate a full year lab for our community. So I've talked a lot of it, and I'd love to pass it over to Jesse to just introduce yourself to start off.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Jesse Del Fierro. I am a second-generation Filipinx non-binary theater performer, creator, artist, however you want to describe it. My mom is from Bulacan, my father's from Pangasinan. And I just bring this up to acknowledge that everything we do, in my personal opinion, is from the land. And so I would love to acknowledge the caretakers who have been taking care of these lands for beyond millennia. I have the privilege of working on both the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. This includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also colloquially known as Vancouver, BC, as well as Treaty 7 territory. And Treaty 7 territory is comprised of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and Métis Nation Region 3. Something that I really treasure about this is the knowledge that Calgary, its original name is Mohkinstsis, which is the Blackfoot word for elbow in reference to the Elbow River, but also just this idea that we are meeting at one point and we are gathered there. Just to acknowledge that we're all meeting at this point and wherever you're listening from, just to give thanks to the land you're on and acknowledge where you come from and your ancestry. I really love remembering and reminding myself that I am living my ancestors' wildest dreams. And so, in a way, I believe I'm following in their footsteps as much as I'm building my own path.
Beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit about how all of that led you to Jedi work and how that ended up bringing you to working at Theatre Alberta?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, there isn't necessarily a start for this work. I remember growing up and beating all the boys in running races and being called too manly and being really proud of that, being really proud that I can compete outside of this binary of the boys can only compete against boys and the girls can only compete against girls. And then just to find out later in life that non-binary exists and there's a word for choosing not to stay in line with the status quo. But consequentially, when you're outside of the status quo, in a lot of ways, the action of including me was political because I was out of the status quo. And so a lot of this, the reason why I came to this work, kind of it was handed to me, kind of I took it on because I saw people who I love and resonated with share similar struggles as I did and still do. And I was curious about what were the structures that were holding us back, these invisible, unspoken rules that we were inevitably breaking just because we exist. And how can we challenge that? How can we push against that in a way that's not alienating anyone the way we have been? How do we include others into this conversation? Because ultimately, unlike the races, this isn't something I had the desire to win. I just want to be in a space where everyone is heading towards the same goal. So that has taken me to a number of different locations. I was born and raised in Mohkinstsis, went to school in Vancouver, and then I came back kind of, I just, there was a calling, there was a need, and I don't know if I could articulate it, but I knew that I needed to go back. And so after coming back and being surprised by all the changes that have happened over the past 7 years that I was away, I wanted to get more involved in the community and see where these changes came from. And that led me to being involved with the 3550, which is a initiative that I actually met Andrés. And through the 3550, with a number of steps in between, that's how I ended up finding myself at Theatre Alberta.
Thanks for that, Jesse.
Thank you. Oh my God, now it's time for me to introduce myself. Thank you so much for being here. Who are you?
Anytime. My name is Andrés Moreno. My pronouns are they, them, ekis. I am gender fluid. I am a settler to this land. I live in what is a Misquachiwaskahagan, which is colonially known as Edmonton. I like to consider myself a goofy person, somebody who leads with joy, and I believe that that really comes from my ancestry and my roots. I was born in Colombia and moved to Canada in 2004. When I moved here, I moved to Red Deer. One of my favorite things about Red Deer is that it straddles two different, what we would call treaties or lands of the original caretakers. And I didn't really recognize that until I moved away. But Red Deer has always felt like this meeting ground or this like connective tissue, for lack of a better word. I did want to take some time to just thank the original caretakers of both lands, of both what we call and what we like colloquially know as Treaty 6 and Treaty 7. Mohkinstsis, which is down in Calgary, is part of Treaty 7. And then here at Misquachiwaskahagan, or colonially known as Edmonton. It's all become my home since I've moved here. And I wanted to take the time to thank and honor the original caretakers of this land, the nations of the Cree, Nakota Sioux, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Métis, as well as the Tsitsika, Kainai, Pagani, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I just want to give the thanks for the opportunities that it gives me because I'm able to do this kind of work because I was lucky enough to land in a land that offers me this kind of opportunity. Since I've been living in Canada, I think there's a bit of that diaspora that led me towards always looking for a home. And so for me, that became the theater. That became my high school classes, theater productions, and that's how I came out of my shell. I was able to come to terms and accept who I am as fully as I am and to be able to make connections and make friends. And so growing up, the theater always was this kind of sacred space for me where you were allowed to come in and be yourself and be challenged and accepted and grow alongside other people. And that led me towards wanting to create a career in the arts and wanting to share stories, make spaces so that other people can walk into a rehearsal hall and feel like they're at home, like they're welcomed, like they can be their true selves and really bring themselves to a creative process. After I graduated high school, I went to a Red Deer college and then I decided I wanted to tap dance. I'm not gonna lie to you, that was the only impetus why I went to theater arts at MacEwan. So I saw the opportunity and I saw the opportunity to also move into a bigger city. So I moved to Edmonton and I lived here. I did my program, I finished, I started working as an artist. And that was all fine and dandy until the pandemic hit. And the pandemic was a real kind of shift for me. I had been so comfortable touring and doing work and working like as an actor that I hadn't really thought about what I was giving back to the community and what I could do with my positionality in this city. And so that led me to getting involved with the 3550, which is where I met Jesse. The 3550 was an initiative that sent out letters to companies here in Alberta, asking them for better representation and to keep their stats of what kind of representation they have in their staff. And it was just a chance for us to gather data and see what it is that our communities are doing and see what is working, and also to see what's not working. So I started working with 3550 and I started to really enjoy being able to do something and being able to kind of work towards making a better landscape and a better community for people to be able to stay here. People graduate from programs here and they want to leave off to the bigger cities because there's more opportunity. But part of the impetus of being able to do this work is how can we create a community that keeps our artists and keeps our community here so that we can continue to work together and create those lasting connections that eventually do shift the way that the work is being done and do open up spaces to be a bit more equitable and a bit more inclusive, and not just inclusive in using the word, but actually making space for people to be able to feel included and feel represented in the work they're doing. So that led me towards getting more involved in the 3550 and working alongside the 3550 folks and with Carrie Mitchell at Theatre Alberta. We found some funds and were able to create a partnership together to be able to create 2 job opportunities. They were me and Jesse. Our title is Partnership and Outreach Coordinators. Our job really is to work with the community and connect with the community and see what it is that we can do on the Theatre Alberta side to be able to offer more spaces and more workshops and more opportunities for our community to come together, to unite, and to be able to work together. And through working together, have actually come up with a project, a dream project. The Engagement Lab is a year-long program that Jesse and I have cooked up for Theatre Alberta. And our impetus is to get 20 leaders who are working with predominantly white institutions and 20 leaders from the community who might come from historically marginalized communities, and getting all together in a room to just have conversations, to talk, to create connections, and to be able to work together instead of siloing our work, to be able to see what happens when you give the community the space to work together. That's my impetus for the lab, and I'm really excited to see how this goes. But I'd love for Jesse to explain that, because it was really your impetus that kind of led us down this path. And I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about it and kind of where the nugget of gold came out and went, hey, Jesse, what about this?
When we first started this position, we had a lot of opportunity to explore what our roles and responsibilities were, both to the 3550 and to Theatre Alberta, and ultimately to the community, because we're all in this together. So a big part of my quote-unquote job at the beginning of all this was to listen and learn and to engage with what's already been going on. And we've seen from the pandemic that all of the inequities and all of the barriers seem to have heightened and made themselves very known. And now that we're slowly emerging from the restrictions, like the big curiosity all of us are having are like, how are we going to go back? And what are the things they're bringing forward with us from what we've learned? And so in this all process of researching, I actually stumbled upon this podcast. Ironic? I think not. This podcast called How to Survive the End of the World, which is hosted by Autumn Brown and Adrienne Marie Brown. In particular, there's this episode called Organizers in Space, What Movement Organizing and Space Exploration Can Learn from One Another. And the nugget that really started this all for me, that shimmered, and I was like, look at this, was this idea that space exploration required years upon years of organizing and planning and preparing, but within a container, within a lab that allowed space for trial and error and exploration and experimentation. It was the idea that we know how this might work. How are all the ways that this might not work? And like, if there's a 1 in a millionth chance that a system could fail, how do we find that so that if it does happen, knock on wood, we're not panicking in the moment of failure. We're coming in with a plan, prepared with a more settled mental state. Because often what I find is when we're in moments of conflict, whether generative or other, we as humans react. We have a lot of feelings. And I believe in feeling all the feelings all the time. You do you, feel. But for this, it's like, how do we feel and then reflect and think about what we're doing, what we're feeling, what were the triggers, how do we proceed, what in this moment do we need right now versus how are we going to fix it in how many ever time spans. So For me, the nugget was like, how do we create a lab and community that we can explore potential conflicts that could exist, but still have conversation, still have experimentation around it. So we are more prepared. So we are building that community capacity to engage with each other during difficult times. And then I brought this up and they were like, that's cool. And I was like, wait, what? You want to do it? Like we're doing this? And they're like, yeah.
And what I loved was this idea of pulling lessons from an industry that seems so different and so opposite to what we're doing. Just in the terms of like, you think, okay, artists and scientists, actor or performers and storytellers, as opposed to scientists and rocket scientists. You think like these two have to be such different processes. But to be able to take apart the titles and go down to, as a rocket science, like having to prepare and be ready for things to go wrong is something that like we talk about a lot of like embracing failure, but how do we actively do that when the failure comes from our own mistakes, as humans? And so that was the impetus where I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. Let's explore what this would look like in our world, right? And how you and I, like Jesse and Andrés, could work towards creating a lab setting, let's say, where these errors can happen and where we have, like you said, that community capacity to be able to work with each other to fix them, or to be able to go back and connect and talk to each other. So that was really what inspired me. So yeah, that's part of my impetus for the lab. Jesse, I'd love to ask you a question, because you were listening to the podcast and the podcast was really focused on processes. But when I was like, yeah, let's do it, what were your fears? I know we're starting strong.
Something I don't often talk about is like, I left because I was terrified of people. Like I come to the point where I was sort of familiar with some folk and sort of not familiar. And that in between, that uncertainty stressed me out so much. And so I left. And now that I'm back, personally, this is such a thing, but like so personally for me, it's reigniting these connections and these relationships and maintaining them. And I think in a way, personally, if not selfishly, like learning for myself how, if and when conflict exists, how do we together in relationship and community manage it together instead of me just running away? So that was like a big personal fear. Also considering that like there was a lot of people involved.
Yeah, we did not make it easy on ourselves.
How would you?
I think a lot of my fears stemmed from the fact that a lot of this work is newer to me, right? And a lot of my involvement in this kind of work is from the impetus of wanting to help and wanting to offer my capacity and my strengths. But when we first started building this, my biggest fear was that I was not prepared or not the right person to be doing it. And that like when especially when it started to get to the point of reaching out to folks and be like, here, come trust us for a year. We're going to try this lab. And knowing that we had a structure, we had an idea of what the lab was going to look like, but also feeling like, what if I make a mistake was my biggest fear. Like, what if this isn't quote unquote perfect, whatever that really means, but really putting that pressure on myself to be like, I need to make this something that's worthwhile for my community, because this is one of the first chances I'm getting to offer something back to my community. And so I want to make sure that it's perfect, and having to let go of those fears of you're not the right person or you're not doing enough. It was genuinely just letting go of the fear that I wasn't the right voice or that I wasn't the person to be leading this. But that also gave me the chance and the challenge to work through it and get to the other side of going, I'm not the right person to be telling these folks what to do. That's not what this is for. My job and my reason for being a part of this lab is to create the spaces for other folks to come in, teach their wisdom, and create conversation within the community. And I get the privilege of being able to help the community get there and offer the community whatever it's asking for at the time, So I think that that's like a way that I turned my fear into something positive. And we'll see how this actually goes throughout the year, to be honest with you, because it's still an ongoing fear. And one more thing I also want to bring forward was the fact that through the grants we received, both from the Canada Council for the Arts and from Alberta Culture's Community Initiatives program, we were able to hire 2 guides to help us with this year process. And I believe we picked 2 of the best guides for us, Adrian Wong and JD Derbish. And so I'm excited to see how the year goes.
This is exciting because I actually know JD and Adrian sort of individually because I've had the opportunity to work with them on separate projects, very like briefly, but still enough to be like, these people know what's up. And then furthermore, something that really excites me is to know that they've collaborated together before for many, many years. And for me, I think something I'm really excited about is just collaboration and learning. Yeah. What are you excited about?
I'm just excited to see what happens when we get these folks who we've talked to one-on-one, who we've had emails with, and actually putting them in a room and going, how do they communicate with each other? How do they relate with each other? To me, I'm very much taking this on as like an experiment in how do you create space that is open enough to have conversations that create friction, that can make space for friction, but also can just flourish with opportunity.
Yeah.
One last question before we wrap up this conversation. As part of the engagement lab, we're having folks come in to every session. So we have 6 online sessions that are being bookended with 2 live in-person sessions. So we're bringing folks into every session who are experts in different topics. And I'm wondering if you have a favorite that you're excited to bring in.
I think for me personally, I would have to say one of the first of the 2 sessions, like early on in the online sessions. I'm really curious about exploring self-reflection because what I find that we don't often talk about in community is how we as individuals exist in community and how building individual capacity will overall build community capacity. That's why I'm like, everyone should go to therapy if you can afford it, and also find a therapist that works for you. Sash, if it's not therapy, just take care of yourself. Which is not an easy feat sometimes, but and that's why, because it's not an easy feat. And so I'm really curious about exploring, who we are as individuals and who we are as individuals in community. How about you?
For me, one of the workshops that we're offering for our in-person in Banff is this workshop about leadership that's led by a knowledge keeper named Daryl Kootenay, an Indigenous knowledge keeper. And I'm just excited about the notion of starting with a workshop that talks about the word leadership, what it means, and kind of like getting folks to start thinking about that. Because I mean, my hope by the end of this is that we're going to end up with 40 leaders who feel a little bit more connected and prepared to take on that leadership role, which is hard. But the idea of getting folks started with the word leadership and seeing how that permeates for the rest of the lab, I think is something that's going to be really interesting to see how it happens.
Gorgeous.
Last question. Do you have a cartoon or a childhood movie you used to watch that brings you a lot of joy, even to this day?
The interesting thing is I don't really remember too much from my childhood. In particular, I don't really remember watching a lot of cartoons or youth television movies, whatever. But I know growing up, when I was finally introduced to them, one that I can pretty confidently say has changed my life in a lot of ways is Steven Universe, which is relatively new, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to watch it. But it just offered a accessible and wholehearted, wholesome conversation around different family dynamics. And I don't think there was a lot of opportunities to explore that in my youthful generation of television. So that always brings me joy. Can I guess yours?
Sure. I think I know which one you're going to guess.
I was going to guess Scooby-Doo.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely Scooby-Doo. It was one of the first loves I had because when we first immigrated, that was around the time that the Scooby-Doo movies came out. But thank you everyone for listening. I'm very excited to see what this podcast generates and the conversations that come out of what we're sharing. I'm excited because we're going to have guests on the podcast. We're going to have the folks who are coming into our sessions to talk about their experiences, talk about their knowledge, and let us know how the sessions have been going and what it's like to build a movement and how hard of an experiment that can be sometimes. So thank you. Jessie, any last parting words?
Thank you, Andrés, for leading this so beautifully. I love being interrogated by you.
Anytime.
And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in.
We'll see you in our next episode. And until then, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Much love.
The Engagement Lab podcast is possible with the initial support from 3 local foundations to transition our all-in program to the 3550 initiative and the Engagement Lab. The foundations were the Edmonton Community Foundation, Calgary Foundation, and the Rozsa Foundation.
We're thrilled to announce that the Engagement Lab is supported by both Alberta Culture's Community Initiatives Program and the Canada Council for the Arts. Theatre Alberta is grateful to our operating funders, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Edmonton Arts Council, and Calgary Arts Development. Thank you so much for tuning in.
And we'll see you next time at the Engagement Lab podcast.